welcome to another episode of REDtalks.live. I am your host, Nathan Pierce, coming to you in my favorite t-shirt, Star Wars DevOps. And I have an awesome guest with me this week. I have the creator of POSTMAN, my favorite API tool, Abhinav. Abhinav, please introduce yourself. Say hi to everyone.
Hi, everyone. I'm Abhinav. As Nathan said, I'm the founder and creator of POSTMAN. Started as a side project and still working on it.
Now, for people who don't know what POSTMAN is, where have you been? I honestly, so from my background, very much infrastructure networking and kind of how to automate that and orchestrate that. And the toughest thing in that entire industry is people who have been trained for years on a CLI or a GUI, and then they're told to integrate, which is done via APIs. And that's like suddenly coming to work and being told as a fluent English, or in my case, Australian speaker, that now you're going to do all of your work in Chinese. It's a completely different mechanism. And is that a fair explanation in your experience, Abhinav? It's kind of crazy different, right?
Yeah, I mean, we started seeing this trend like a while back where infrastructure components, software components, products all started getting abstracted out as APIs. We finally saw that the network layer, all the good work put in by great companies is come to a point where the network layer is fast enough, and we can have a standardized protocol in which we can connect all these things together. And APIs have become the default way in which software and hardware pieces are talking to each other. So I think it was a movement that was getting built up over time, and we are at the stage where we are seeing so many different kinds of impact of this.
That's cool. Appreciate your insight there. So now that we've kind of set the scene for the typical REDtalks.live kind of listener, like this jump to an API world and an integrated and orchestrated world, let's step completely in a different direction. Tell me about day one of the idea for POSTMAN. Like, how did that come to you, and what were you solving that day when you wanted to go down that path?
Yeah, I mean, I think like looking back at it, I think the idea was it brew over a long period of time, kind of came from the frustration of like using existing tools, writing the same code over and over again. And as developers don't like to repeat themselves too often. And I think I was always like in the I wanted to create products and things for other people to use, and finally I found a problem that felt like a real pain point to myself. So I think day one was just trying stuff out, and I think there was this one idea I had, which was that you have your CLI, you have your other REST tools there. They don't really remember what you have sent before, and all I wanted to do was like debug this API that I was building really, really quickly. And I would have to go back and remember what I sent, and I would save these snippets all over the place. So like, okay, let me just try to do this myself. And I had this bare idea of like what the client is going to look like, and then there was this history feature that I built up. And once you build something and it's useful to you, like it like how useful it is builds up over time. But I know it was immediately useful for me. And then I was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. So I felt good about it.
That's really interesting. So what you were describing, though, for people in the network industry is pretty much the exact same as dealing with the CLI via some SSH session that they're running, because as you're typing things and then you go to configure something and you bring another interface up and then you're like, I've got to add it to that VLAN. What was that tag again? Either it's on my notepad or I'm going to scroll up the window. I mean, you're effectively... you were confronted with the same problem of like, I'm interacting with an API and now I've got to remember the value that came out of that UUID generating system there and put it into this one here. And well, that's just torture if you're using, I mean, curl is great. Curl's got me out of some mess before, but it's not a tool I want as my forefront interaction, that's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, things are good when there was like an API call you would like send once in a while, right? That's how I was like building stuff. You would write your application, it would connect to a database, and you would send mostly calls to the browser, and oh, okay, there's an API, and kind of, fine. Once in a while is good. But I was, honestly, that like Postman was there before. And it's kind of when you recognize that shit, like, did anybody notice? And let me go and build this very quickly. And what you say is very true, right? I was like, computer systems have infinite memory practically. They can remember much better than what we could do. They could help us in avoiding like basic mistakes. And I was like, there's no badge of honor in using a CLI and putting all this stuff in my head, which is what computers are designed to do. Why can't the computer work for me instead of me having to work for the computer? And that was a spark that has kind of guided like a lot of things that we built in Postman. Even it was less about the CLI GUI bit, and I know people get very passionate about it. Like, a GUI can be more powerful than a CLI, and CLI is sometimes more customizable than a GUI. But even more than that, the cognitive overload that your brain goes through was just not worth it.
That I love that example that you just gave there. There's not that term. There's no badge of honor in remembering all those things. Now, I'll be on probably more in my 20s than now in my 40s, but I remember like just hammering away and being like, "Yep, and that's this, and this is this," and pulling stuff out. And yeah, I often made a mistake, and because I was relying purely on my memory, tracing that back was extremely difficult, and working out where was the bit that I missed and how does it go. And some people can do that. There's like 0.01% out there that are able to just Rain Man for numbers kind of thinking that can just work it all out. But for most of us in the world, we need a smoother, more interactive, more helpful interactive solution like what you've created. And that now enables API interaction to be accessible to the broader public versus these tools that can do it, but they can be extremely frustrating as well, these CLI-driven API tools. Yeah, totally. So on the infrastructure world, everybody, I think Postman's really well known, this API client, for helping developers develop APIs as a client to kind of communicate and validate what they're getting. But what about for our infrastructure automation listeners? Like, can you give me some examples, people that you work with that are actually from our world?
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of use cases kind of come up, and we really have focused kind of since those early days of Postman to keep we could have added like a lot of features, and we could have done like 50 things that would have complicated the product, and we kind of didn't do that because Postman addresses a lot of people who really want to access like the power of APIs on infrastructure itself. I was surprised that as infrastructure is getting more and more abstracted out as APIs, people use Postman to set up their dev machines, their staging environments. They use they have recipes built in the form of Postman collections. And Postman, I guess fewer people that we'd like know this, but Postman has a very powerful runtime where you can write scripts within the Postman environment, and again, right, it can do things for you. So instead of writing like bash scripts or curl commands one after the other, or books that recipes that are written in Word docs, you can actually translate that into code and use it for all sorts of infrastructure automation. We see Cisco talking about this a lot, kind of this notion of API ops, where you have these API components available to you, and they are essentially abstracting out your infrastructure. So we focus as a company on making sure that working with APIs and that unit is extremely easy. Postman can help you, put that together put APIs together in different ways. And then we have seen tons of use cases kind of come out of that. So, at this point, if you have an HTTP API available for any infrastructure piece, and you have bash scripts, curl commands, older documentation lying around, you can actually transition a lot of that to Postman and really make your workflow faster. And more and more examples are coming to us every day.
There's two things I wanna just focus on that you mentioned there that were light bulb kind of moments for me when I started looking at Postman. So the first thing, the collection runner. That thing is magical. I remember first looking at Postman just as a one-to-one transaction response kind of client, and I was like, okay, well, that's cool. I was doing that in curl, and now I'm doing it in here. And yeah, it's kind of nicer because I can save them and stuff. And I was like, yeah that's great. But I was wondering that there's this, I could feel there's something more. And then I discovered scripting in it, where you can JavaScript in the test.
Yeah.
And I was able to build a collection where the first call was getting an auth token, passing the auth token in as an environment variable to the next request and the next request. And the next thing I knew was helping other engineers take that first step off the CLI. I was able to ask them, what are you trying to achieve? Build them a collection.
Yeah.
And then send them that collection, that series of calls that feed into each other, and they would then just import and hit run, and they were achieving the same thing. So my ability to help others because of Collection Runner and its scripting ability suddenly meant I could show people the power of automation, because the power of the API without that automated approach to using it actually is hard to understand. It's like it's just another interface. Once you link them together and you use things like Collection Runner, though, then it's just like light bulb moment. It's like, wow, that 1 hour just happened in 8 seconds. And it's going to run exactly correctly every time, because it's not me fat fingering or mouse moving around it and making mistakes. So that Collection Runner, I mean, to salute you. That thing is just fantastic.
That's awesome to hear.
In addition to the Collection Runner, though, and when I train people, when I explain to them like how to take that first step to the API, I give them sample collections, and I'm like, so remember how you used to build a cluster of devices? Now you run this, and it builds a cluster by the API. Well, the next logical step is I've shown them how to be the automation tool. Once I'm comfortable with that, I can take the leap of integrating with someone else's further upstream tooling. The code button. Create your workflow, you hit code, and it's like, what language do you want? I want Python. There's the Python code that does that interaction we just worked on. Like those two things, Collection Runner and the code generator, I mean, suddenly taking that transition from me as an individual, I'm going to automate my experience with infrastructure, and I'm going to use Postman to kind of get comfortable with that. That ends up being actually the biggest part of the journey, because once I am comfortable, handing that over and supporting it with another team is easy. I'm just being that middle agent. So I mean,
No, that's awesome to hear. You know, a couple of thoughts kind of come to mind. I can share how the Collection Runner kind of came to be. So, you know, we are fundamentally very community driven. Like all have been doing since the first version of Postman is just listening to what people are saying and what are they using it for. And I think at one point we got this very odd request in our issue tracker saying that Postman collections don't support anything more than 100 requests or some 500, big number of API requests, right? And I was I thought there were always going to be 20, 30 API endpoints that you're typically working with in an API, right? I, of course, discovered that that was not true. But in that context, I asked the person, okay, what exactly are you trying to do? So what they had done was, they had these different parameters, and they were incrementing it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up till I mean, they each were slightly different requests, and they were firing it out manually, right? So I was like, that doesn't make sense. They're just this variation of one request, and can we automate it, right? And Postman itself was built on Node and JavaScript. So I was like, the easiest way to do this is, layer in a JavaScript runtime. So it was kind of a hack that I did, and it worked. And then I saw that fundamentally this enables so many different things that it should just be there. So initially that was an in-app purchase that we actually made free, just for everybody to use. And now whatever you were doing manually, you could automate, and you could so another viewpoint Postman is that you kind of see what you're working on, and that's how the Collection Runner came to be, right? We could have it kind of hidden in the background, oh, this thing is spinning, but we wanted a visual representation, so you can go back to debugging if something went wrong. And we found that to be very useful. The code button, of course, is a big hit. People want to go back to they can go back to their favorite language if they want to. I'm not sure if have you tried out Newman, the command line runner we have had by any chance so far?
I have that. That's the one bullet point I wrote down on my post-it note here to not forget to talk about. Now, so you guys are obviously fans of Seinfeld, then, right?
Yeah.
Postman, if anyone's watched Seinfeld, Newman is the name of the Postman I actually did do a prototype where I embedded Newman inside of an API, and I called that project Festivus, also a Seinfeld event. So Festivus running Newman collections inside of a foreign third-party API framework.
Wow. Okay.
I'm a huge fan of Newman, the ability
Awesome.
to run these collections
Yeah.
as a node module, like in a node library in your own code.
Yeah. Yeah. We also, Newman is open source, the runtime is open source, and you can actually even include the runtime as a library in JavaScript code that you're writing. But that was kind of the next step for us to see, okay, you send one call, then you automate a bunch of calls, you see the result of that, and then that's a unit that you can, operate. And the call that we took is collections should run the same way wherever they can be run. We're going to take responsibility for that. So making sure the Newman tool works the same way as the Postman app, and then we have a monitoring server-side infrastructure which also runs collections. It also gives you the same environment. We want it to be like, click a button and go. And collections themselves we have designed as a shareable unit, right? We want people to just get started. They don't have to include like 500 dependencies, and like it should just give you that feeling that my work is progressing. So collections are exportable, importable. We kind of build the whole collaboration system around it, which is kind of our paid model, but we can talk about it if you want to. But the core thesis was that we especially with respect to APIs and API driven workflows, it's a collaborative thing. You want to you fundamentally want to share. Even if you have one API, there's a producer and there's a consumer. Typically there are a lot more consumers, because if your API is being just used by one person, then you probably have a bad API or probably a very narrow use case. So typically there are lots of consumers. They all build interesting things on top, and lots of different use cases. And that if they can share faster and faster, uh, you know work gets done much faster. So we looked at kind of these things that were happening with Postman, and we are like, okay, that's what we actually have to enable. And then there were calls that we've had to take, sometimes, which are tough to take in the short term, right? Like, okay, do we support like third-party libraries? Like if we do that, then it creates a dependency problem. We want to do that, but it makes collections a little less shareable. So how do we solve for these problems is an ongoing kind of question. But just seeing how much this is being used and how quickly it has been adopted is just been crazy for us to experience as well.
And thank you on behalf of all of us using it for what you've created. I was taking a note on my new MacBook of what it was I installed before I felt like I was up and running. And it was basically the Office suite, because I use Office 365, Spotify, Postman, and VS Code. And
Wow.
I then feel comfortable. I'm like, well, okay, everything else is kind of a nice to have. Gotta have Spotify in there. I mean, I can't code without tunes. But that's like my key things. Postman, like VS Code, and like I'm up and running then. And I just want to extend on something we talked about earlier, like the idea of helping people get off of CLIs and how we create collections and then export them and send them. I think a feature that maybe more people need to know about is how you guys created team capabilities and documentation capabilities. Because so what I was doing was helping people take that first step, that scary first step of like, I'm going to try and do what I've been doing every day via an API. But once you get hooked on that, because you realize how operationally efficient and safer it is to run programmatically, suddenly you want to be able to share that and work as a group. And what if I update my collection because we've got a new version of something and I need the rest of my team to immediately get that and the documentation with it? So can you tell us a little bit about kind of Postman, the more sort of grown-up professional level, I guess, your teams and your collaborative side? Like tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. So kind of, as I was mentioning, that we saw that APIs are fundamentally like collaborative things, right? And we saw people coming to us, as I said, right? We are very community driven. So we saw people were exporting, importing a lot. They were using source control for collaboration, and they can still do that. They were sharing these links. So I had set up a very basic PHP server to let people create collection links and share it with others. And then every time we'd kind of enable sharing a bit better, people would have even more demands on sharing. So we saw that like we kind of imagined like a team working together and say that there is this organizational knowledge they have. right? Which is kind of distributed. It's in this machine and this repo and that person's head. And how can they create like this shared source of truth among themselves, right? It could be API docs, it could be tests, it could be recipes, it could be anything, right? And once you have that, then you get a lot of advantages. You can bring more people in. If one person moves from one team to another, it's easier. The transition, the knowledge transfer is easier. Getting people onboarded is easier. And also we heard from people, and there's been one very interesting observation that you ask somebody whether would you like great documentation, they would say yes. And if you ask them, would you like to do documentation, they would say no, right? So just being the default, right? Like we want to get stuff done, and it's like who's going to sit down and document stuff. So we said that okay, we're going to create this construct of these shared workspaces where automatically whatever work that you're doing is in the workspace, and people are it's kind of creating like a shared room, right, where people are working together, and we'll automatically version things for you. We will automatically make sure that people are synchronized. It's a real-time version control system, and you can invite people to it and they can work together. So today in Postman, you have this construct of a workspace. If you are doing things on your own, you have personal workspaces. They're free to use. And if you are using it in a business or a professional setting, we have our pro or enterprise plans, and you can create collaborative workspaces, and you can share collections and work on them together in these workspaces. All these Postman tools are available to you. And the same thing kind of applies, right? Like you join a workspace and you're good to go. Like all the collections, like the way somebody else has been using them, is going to work for you. So slowly what starts happening is that instead of these distributed pieces of information like bash scripts or source code repos or update out of date documentation, it starts getting in one place, and that people really like it, right? Because you're more efficient in doing that. So we've seen a lot of success in that. We made the collaboration feature free recently for up to 25 requests.
Wow.
So you can, you can, if you can try it out, if you want to try it out, you can just do that. And if you find value in it, then people typically like to pay on their own. So so it's a constant work in progress for us. We want to make sure that people really work fast, and we feel like that's kind of an evolution of like traditional source control systems that we are pushing forward, especially for kind of like this API first world that we are in.
That's really cool. I remember much earlier when I very first started working with Postman, you hadn't done like much of the collaboration development yet.
Mm-hmm.
I was exporting my collections and just checking them into repos.
Mm-hmm.
And for someone who's kind of new to it, you send them a link and it's just JSON, like masses of it. It's a little bit intimidating. Whereas the approach that you've done within the tool and how you can collaborate within the tool, that totally eliminated all of that kind of first intimidating approach. So definitely a much better way of collaborating on APIs and collections is to use the Teams functionality you've developed. That's really cool.
Thank you.
We're kind of getting towards the end of time on this episode. I really appreciate your time. I mean, is there any message you want to leave our audience with? Any idea, anything you're looking at? Live long and prosper, whatever you feel like saying to close it out.
Yeah, I think you can do that, right? No, I don't know. Yeah, maybe I can do that. Yeah. Okay. So no, I'm very, very excited, about all the changes that are happening in the world around APIs. And I think APIs are an enabler of so many different things. We see, and hopefully like people, watching this see APIs as building blocks of modern software. I think we're at the early stages of that transition. And we have always focused on making things easy, and I mean I think it's kind of our duty in a way to bring the power of APIs to more and more people. If there's anything we can improve, we are always available on so many different places, like our GitHub issue tracker, our community, Twitter, and if there's anything we can do better, I would always appreciate that. It's very exciting, and I think that there's a lot more that's going to happen in the API world, which Postman is very happy to be proud of.
That's awesome, and we're very happy to have you there. Love the product, love using it, recommend it all the time. For those who have just watched this episode and are thinking, oh my God, I have to be a part of this, you want to visit getpostman.com. And something I've always liked is how good your introduction videos are to
Oh, really?
product, getting it installed. Like, great effort. There are so many awesome tools out there, like on GitHub, but the problem is you need to be an accomplished developer and read half the source code to work out how to use it, and that's not accessible. But what you guys have done is very accessible, and anyone can kind of onboard and jump onto that. So thanks for that. Go to getpostman.com and take a look at that documentation. So wrapping up now, thanks Abhinav for coming along. Really great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Awesome. And you've been listening to Nathan Pierce, your host of REDtalks.live, your home of ranting engineers and DevOps. Thanks for listening.